Chapter 2. Within the Jade City. Lianhua walked into Yu City, in his heart hoping to heal Yu Qiushuang. Yu City, also known as the Jade City, was located in the Kunlun Mountains, where it was built atop the most desolate and barren of the mountains. But despite this, it contained rare treasures, and only 10 people in the martial arts world could enter. The 10th one was Lianhua, and the 9th one was known as Zongjang Mingzhuo. Zongjang Mingzhuo was known for many things. For one, he was Yu Qiushuang's fiancé, but also he was the grandson of the prime minister, he was a 5th-rank official in the court, and last but not least, he was every girl's dream man. He was the kind of man who is both gentle and elegant in every way possible, not to mention graceful with both poems and swords. Zongjang Mingzhuo had arrived in Yu City more than half a month earlier than Lianhua did, just a day after Yu Qiushuang's death. Yu Mulan was so saddened by the death of his beloved daughter that he went crazy after her body was returned home, forcing 50 or 60 of his swordsmen to commit suicide. Afterward, he set fire to the Yu Palace. "So, what do you think, Physician Li?" Zongjang Mingzhuo asked. The elegant and noble young man in white stood behind Lianhua, watching him with a slight nervousness. Lianhua bent down to look at Yu Qiushuang, who had been placed in a coffin made of ice to slow the decomposition process. Lianhua had been standing like that for what felt like hours, not even moving a muscle. Suddenly he let out an "ah" when he heard the question. Zongjang Mingzhuo shifted, confused at Lianhua's behavior. "Physician Li?" he asked again, clearing his throat. "Are you sure this is Yu Qiushuang?" Lianhua asked suddenly. Zongjang Mingzhuo was so stunned at the question he didn't know how to answer. "You see, when Master Yu set fire to the palace, Qiushuang's body was unfortunately affected by the flames." He trailed off and rubbed the back of his neck. The body in the ice coffin was more like a horrifying corpse, due to it being burned beyond recognition by the fire. But it was the fact that it was only partially burned that made the body look all the more terrifying. Even if a true miracle doctor had the power to bring back such a person, one would be afraid of the consequences. Although Li Lianhua wasn't immortal, he was a genius, and Zongjang Mingzhuo at least hoped that he could find some clues that a normal person would have missed. "Aha. Is this really Qiushuang?" Li Lianhua asked again. Zongjang Mingzhuo nodded stiffly. Although the corpse had become extremely disfigured, many of Yu Qiushuang's features were still vaguely visible. Li Lianhua pulled out a small knife from his satchel with printed blue flowers, and carefully swiped it across Yu Qiushuang's abdomen. Zongjang Mingzhuo was taken aback and reached out quickly to block the knife. "Physician Li, what are you doing?" Li Lianhua stood holding the knife, his hand blocked by Zongjang Mingzhuo's arm. But even with Li Lianhua's neatly trimmed nails, just a swipe of one finger would have been enough to create a cut through the rotten flesh. Zongjang Mingzhuo glanced at Qiushuang's body and immediately withdrew his hand, his heart skipping a beat. The skin that had been cut wasn't bleeding. Suddenly he watched in awe as Li Lianhua picked something out of Yu Qiushuang's abdomen with the tip of the knife. "What is that?" he asked. "Blood clot," Li Lianhua replied. It was a blood clot that had been coagulating for a long time. Zongjang Mingzhuo was shocked. "Blood clot?" Anyone with common sense knows that a blood clot in the abdomen means there was most likely an injury to the internal organs. "What do you mean? Are you saying there was internal bleeding?" Li Lianhua smiled slightly. "This ghost's way of killing people is very strange indeed. Instead of doing something like sucking all of her blood, he destroyed her intestines and caused her to bleed to death internally. If you ask me, it seems impossible for a mere ghost to do something of the sort." Zongjang Mingzhuo frowned. "Are you saying that Qiushuang was not killed by a ghost but by a human being?" Li Lianhua dodged the question, but still gave a determined answer. "I only know that she's been dead for too long. I can't bring her back at this point, and it doesn't help that her body was burned so badly." Zongjang Mingzhuo shook his head vigorously, his gold-threaded silk sleeves flowing delicately with the action. "I don't understand. Even if Qiushuang was killed by someone, why would they have killed her this way? Every academy in the martial arts world has its own techniques of teaching, but it's unlikely that one would have such a heavy hand with something like this. It would be unreasonable to attack someone so far below the chest and heart." Li Lianhua suddenly let out a frightened cry, and Zongjang Mingzhuo was taken aback again, even more confused at his actions than ever. Zongjang Mingzhuo paused, not knowing what to do, so he changed the subject. "Recently there have been strange things happening at night here in Yu City." "I'm afraid of ghosts," Li Lianhua whispered shakily. Zongjang Mingzhuo pitied the man. He dared to cut open the stomach of a corpse, but he was so afraid of ghosts? He was confused, but he felt like he needed to say the next sentence. In that case, would you like to spend the night in my room? Lianhua readily agreed, his face full of embarrassment. Oh, I'm ashamed, quite ashamed, he said, lowering his head. That night, Li Lianhua had dinner with Yu Mulan's family. Yu Hongju, the wife of the Yu family, surprised Li Lianhua the most. This woman had lost her daughter, but she still handled things properly and with grace. She was far more shrewd and capable than any of the men in the Yu family, and though she was nearly 40 years old, she was still extremely elegant and beautiful. It turned out that Yu Hongju, the only daughter of the Kunlun mountain branch of the Yu family, was the only daughter in the Yu family at all. In order to pass on the name, Pu Mulan, a down-and-out scholar, married into the Yu family 20 years ago and changed his surname to Yu. Although he was famous all over the world as the governor of Yu City, the affairs of the city were actually managed by Yu Hongju. She was a rare heroine among women. Hearing that Li Lianhua had come to try and heal her daughter, Yu Hongju clearly didn't believe it. She didn't tell anyone her thoughts and just let Li Lianhua's words torment her. Nighttime. Yu Palace guest room. As agreed, Zongjung Mingjue and Li Lianhua stayed in the same room together. There were 2 beds, and Li Lianhua slept on one, while Zongjung Mingjue slept on the other. More like he just laid there, because he couldn't sleep at all. He had never slept in the same room with another person before, not even his own fiancée. In fact, he'd never even kissed his own fiancée before. What's more, the person on the bed beside his own wasn't the beautiful and elegant Yu Choshuang, but another man, a seemingly commonplace man who behaved in a way that made people think oddly and carefully. Li Lianhua had given Zongjung Mingjue the impression that he was dedicated and bookish, and seemed to have little understanding of the world. But if he was really a bookworm who didn't understand the world, how could he know to rely on his fame to come and go freely in Yu City? Of course, to say that Li Lianhua was scheming was a bit much, but Zongjung Mingjue couldn't think of any benefit Li Lianhua would get from coming to Yu City and pretending to be a miracle doctor to cure Yu Choshuang. Yu Choshuang died of internal bleeding of the intestines, and she was not injured on the outside at all. So how did Li Lianhua know? All kinds of troubles and doubts swirled through his mind, making Zongjung Mingjue unable to drift off. Suddenly, his eyes shot open. He heard an unusual noise coming from outside the door to the room the 2 of them shared. Before he could decide to get up and check what it was, he noticed many green and blue dot-shaped shadows appear outside the window opposite the door. Some looked far away, and some looked near, and then suddenly a strange singing voice echoed through the window from the distant courtyard. The voice, seemingly female, carried a strange, serious tone. It was not a song that just anyone could understand. Was this the ghost in the blue window that everyone had seen on the day Cho Shuang died? Zongjung Mingjue lay still in the dark room, looking at the shadow on the window, and he couldn't help but feel terrified. He took a deep breath, listening intently for a while, but he couldn't seem to make out any words that sounded like they came from a human. Suddenly sitting up from the bed, he quickly approached the window and opened it with his outstretched hand. The moon and the stars were twinkling outside the window, the cool air brushing his face. There was nothing. Suddenly a voice broke through the silence. "Look in the window." He flinched and broke out in a cold sweat immediately, frightened by Li Lianhua's voice. Hearing the words, he pulled down the window smoothly. Li Lianhua lit a candle and got off the bed, walking over slowly. The candlelight shone on the window, and the strange green shadows disappeared as if they were afraid of the glowing light. Li Lianhua stretched out his right index finger and scratched hard on the window screen with his slender nails, only to hear a chirping sound. He should have seen through to the outside through the rip in the paper screen, but instead something crawled out from the paper crack. Zongjung Mingjue smiled wryly. There were 2 layers of window paper pasted on the window, and fireflies with their wings pulled off had been placed in the gap between them. At night, the fireflies would twinkle in the gap between the windows, just like the ghost shadows that looked far away and near. But during the day and when there was candlelight, the fireflies weren't visible. It turns out the ghosts in the blue window were only little bugs. He looked at Li Lianhua in amazement and couldn't help but ask, "How did you know about this?" Li Lianhua smiled slightly. "You see, I'm afraid of ghosts, and I know the difference between human and non-human voices." Zhongzhen Mingjue didn't know whether to believe him or not, so he could only smile in return. Li Lianhua shook the window screen. Do you smell that scent? These bugs have been stunned by a certain medicine, but they won't wake up until the middle of the night. There must be an opening in the window paper outside. Once the fireflies wake up and find a way out, the so-called ghost disappears. Zhongzhen Mingjue nodded. Sure enough, Qiu Shuang's death has more to it than meets the eye, and the ghost in the blue window is really someone just pretending to be a ghost. As they spoke, the voice singing the strange song suddenly cried out in a mournful tone. And then there was silence. Zhongzhen Mingjue was taken aback, his handsome face turning pale immediately. How could the ghost of the blue window appear in Yu City? What exactly is happening here? Li Lianhua sighed and made an because some people don't believe in ghosts, and some are so afraid of them that they appear even at the slightest disturbance, he said. Li Lianhua yawned, rubbing his eyes. Oh, I'm sleepy. You should come to sleep too. It came as a shock to Zhongzhen Mingjue that after discovering the secret of the ghosts in the blue window, Li Lianhua could only conclude that he was sleepy and that Zhongzhen Mingjue should come to sleep too. After standing for another moment, Li Lianhua returned to his bed and continued to sleep peacefully. But Zhongzhen Mingjue still couldn't sleep at all. All he could do was sit on the bed and stare blankly at the torn window screen, his mind in a mess. Qiu Shuang was killed by a human being, but how could the body have suddenly appeared in Cheng Yunhe's cargo box? Who was behind the ghost illusion in the window? Who was behind the sounds they had heard tonight? Was it Li Lianhua's arrival that had made things feel uneasy? All kinds of thoughts gathered in his mind as the handsome young man's face was as pale as death in the moonlit room, his eyes full of fear and confusion. If the beautiful, sweet girl who fell in love with him had seen him in that state, she surely would have been upset. But the man on the bed beside him was sleeping soundly, without even the slightest look of worry on his delicate features.